Sometimes love finds us in the unlikeliest places, at the most unexpected times. This is a story of how being trapped together with a stranger changed two lives forever. It was one of those bitterly cold winter evenings when the air felt sharp against your skin and the city seemed to move in fast forward. I had just wrapped up a freelance photography gig, a corporate event that was as dull as it was exhausting. My camera bag felt heavier than usual, my shoulders stiff from hours of work. All I wanted was to get home, sink into my couch, and lose myself in anything but the monotony of editing photos. The subway platform was crowded as always, but the mood was subdued. People avoided eye contact, focused on their phones, or simply stared ahead with the blank expressions of commuters who had done this 1,000 times before. I squeezed onto the train just as the doors were closing, finding a spot near the center of the car. I remember noticing her right away. She was seated near the door, balancing a laptop bag on her lap and a cup of coffee in her hand. Her expression mirrored how I felt, tired, distracted, and ready to escape the day. She didn't look up, but there was something about her presence that held my attention for a fleeting moment before I shifted my focus elsewhere. The train jerked forward, then suddenly stopped with a loud screech. Lights flickered, and a collective groan rose from the passengers. I looked around, confused, as an announcement crackled through the speaker. "We're experiencing a delay due to technical difficulties. Please remain patient." Minutes turned into half an hour, then an hour. The air in the subway car grew colder, the atmosphere more tense. People muttered complaints under their breath or shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I caught myself glancing at the woman by the door, wondering how she was handling the situation. She sighed heavily, placing her coffee cup on the floor beside her bag. Her phone battery must have been low because she tucked it away and folded her arms, staring ahead with a resigned expression. Something about her frustration made me smile. An odd reaction, I admit. Maybe it was the absurdity of our situation, or perhaps I just found her relatable in that moment. As the train remained immobile, someone made a feeble attempt to lighten the mood by cracking a joke about subway delays. It fell flat, but it did break the silence. I decided to add my own comment, a lighthearted, "Well, at least we'll have a great story to tell after this." She glanced up, and for the first time our eyes met. She chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that felt unpracticed but genuine. "If we ever get out of here," she replied. Her reply lingered in the air longer than I expected, and I found myself smiling without meaning to. There was something about her tone, dry yet warm, that pulled me in. I leaned slightly forward, resting my hands on my camera bag. "Well," I said, trying to keep the conversation alive, "if we're stuck here much longer, we might as well start charging rent." She raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "That, or they should at least bring us snacks," she said, her voice carrying a mix of sarcasm and humor. That small exchange broke the invisible wall between us. I shifted to a seat closer to hers, still leaving some space, not wanting to seem intrusive. "I'm Adam, by the way," I offered. "Maya," she said, meeting my gaze briefly before glancing at the ceiling, as if willing the train to start moving. At first, our conversation was as casual as you'd expect between two strangers. We talked about the delay, the cold weather, and the usual frustrations of city life. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the surface-level chatter began to peel away. She told me she worked in marketing, her days filled with endless emails and meetings that left little room for anything else. "It's funny," she said, her voice softening. "I wanted this job so badly when I started out. Now, I'm not sure it's what I want at all." I nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I get that," I said. "I mean, I love photography, but sometimes it feels, lonely. Like I'm always looking at life from the outside, capturing other people's moments, but not really living my own." Her eyes softened, and for the first time she looked directly at me, holding my gaze a little longer than before. "That's honest," she said, almost as if she wasn't sure how to respond. The train remained still, but the world around us seemed to fade as we talked. She shared snippets of her life, a long-term relationship that had ended 6 months ago, leaving her questioning everything. I told her about my struggles with freelance work, the unpredictable income, the sense of drifting without a clear destination. Somewhere in the midst of it, the tension of the situation melted away. We laughed at the absurdity of our predicaments, shared stories that neither of us had planned on telling, and listened to each other in a way that felt different. There was no judgment, no expectations, just two strangers finding solace in a shared moment. It struck me how easy it was to talk to her, how natural it felt despite the odd circumstances. By the time we saw the faint glow of lights ahead, signaling that the train might move again, I realized I didn't want the conversation to end. As the minutes passed, the conversation took on a life of its own, flowing easily, as if we weren't complete strangers but two people who had known each other for years. Somewhere between her story about the career she wasn't sure she loved anymore, and my ramblings about the unpredictability of freelancing, something shifted. I think we all get stuck in our own routines, I said, running a hand through my hair, like we're chasing something we're supposed to want, but we never stop to ask if we actually want it. Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. Exactly, she said. I spend so much time worrying about what's next that I forget to appreciate what's now. She paused, then let out a short laugh. Listen to me, sounding like a self-help book. I smiled. Maybe, but you're not wrong. I mean, when was the last time you felt really happy? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She hesitated, then shrugged. I don't know. It's been a while, I guess. What about you? I considered her question, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. I think I've been so focused on getting by that I haven't thought about it. But sitting here now, talking to you, it feels good. Like I don't have to pretend I have everything figured out. Her eyes softened, and she gave me a small, almost shy smile. Yeah, she said quietly. Me too. The air between us felt lighter, yet charged with something unspoken. It wasn't just the words we were exchanging. It was the way she listened so intently, the way her laugh felt like a tiny burst of light in the dim subway car. I wasn't sure if it was the situation or something more, but I felt connected to her in a way that was both strange and undeniable. At one point the conversation veered into dreams and plans. She talked about wanting to see Paris one day, the way she imagined walking along the Seine with no agenda, just a camera and a good pair of walking shoes. I laughed and told her it sounded like a photographer's dream too. What about you? She asked. What's your big dream? I hesitated. To capture something real. Not just a good photo, but a moment that means something. Something that changes the way people see the world. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, I think you already have. You just don't realize it yet. Her words caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. I wasn't used to someone seeing me like that, and the honesty in her voice was disarming. In that moment, something unspoken passed between us. A mutual understanding maybe, or a rare kind of warmth that felt like home. The train finally jolted to life with a loud groan, and the lights flickered back on, brighter than they had been before. There was a collective sigh of relief from the passengers, followed by the shuffle of people grabbing their bags and preparing to leave. Maya and I exchanged a quick glance, and though neither of us said it aloud, the shared silence seemed to hold the same thought. The moment was ending. As the train crept forward toward the next station, the energy in the car shifted. The strangers around us, who had been stuck together for hours, began retreating back into their own worlds. Phones came out, conversations ceased, and the bubble of connection we had all been in slowly dissolved. I watched Maya as she gathered her things, carefully sliding her laptop back into her bag. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her movements slow, almost hesitant. I couldn't shake the feeling that the time we'd spent talking had been more than just passing the hours. It felt like something meaningful, even if I couldn't quite define it. When the train pulled into the station, there was a rush of movement as passengers surged toward the doors. Maya and I lingered for a moment, standing side by side near the exit. I wanted to say something, anything to keep the connection alive, but the words stuck in my throat. Well, she said with a small smile, we survived. Barely, I replied, trying to match her tone, though the knot in my chest made it difficult. We stepped off the train together, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of panic. What if this was it? What if we walked away and became just another story of fleeting strangers who crossed paths and then disappeared from each other's lives? Before I could overthink it, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Listen, I said, my voice a little rushed. I don't know if you'd be interested, but maybe we could grab a coffee sometime? Outside of a broken subway car, I mean. She laughed softly, a sound that made the tightness in my chest ease. Yeah, she said, her eyes meeting mine. I'd like that. We exchanged numbers, a simple exchange that somehow felt monumental. As she walked away, disappearing into the flow of the crowd, I felt an odd mix of emotions, relief that I'd taken a chance and a strange ache at the thought of not seeing her again soon. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, replaying the past few hours in my mind. It was funny, I thought. You go through life expecting big dramatic moments to change everything, and yet, sometimes it's the quiet ones, like a broken train and an unexpected conversation, that leave the deepest mark. After that night on the subway, I couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't just the conversation, or the way her laugh had cut through the tension of being stuck in that freezing car. It was something else. Something about her felt familiar, even though we'd only just met. I found myself scrolling through my phone, looking at her name in my contacts, debating whether to reach out. A day passed, then two. By the third day, I couldn't resist anymore. I typed out a simple message. "Hey, it's Adam, the guy from the subway. Still up for that coffee?" I hesitated before hitting send, unsure if I was being too forward or if she'd even reply. But before I could second-guess myself, my phone buzzed with her response. "Absolutely. How about this weekend?" When we met again, it felt different. We weren't strangers anymore, but we weren't quite friends either. That first coffee stretched into hours of conversation, neither of us wanting to be the one to say goodbye. We talked about everything: work, dreams, fears, the things we didn't always share with the people closest to us. There was something about Maya that made it easy to open up, like she genuinely wanted to understand me, not just hear the words I said. One coffee turned into another. Then dinner, then long walks through the city where time seemed to melt away. I started to notice the little things about her, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about traveling, and how she always listened so intently, even to the smallest details. Somewhere along the way, what had started as a chance connection turned into something deeper. We didn't need grand declarations or dramatic moments. It was in the way she made me feel seen, in the way our silences were as comfortable as our conversations. She told me once, over a quiet dinner, that night on the subway, it was awful, but I wouldn't change it. Not for anything. I felt the same. It was strange to think that a mechanical failure, something so frustrating and inconvenient, had brought us together. But maybe that was how life worked: messy, unpredictable, and full of surprises you never saw coming. The more time we spent together, the more I realized I didn't want to imagine a life without her in it. What had started as a coincidence had turned into something I could only describe as fate, and for the first time in a long time, I stopped questioning whether I was on the right path, because with her, everything felt right. Months passed, and what had started as a chance encounter grew into something neither of us had expected. Our days began to intertwine seamlessly. Spontaneous meetups turned into planned weekends, and planned weekends turned into a rhythm of sharing our lives. Maya became the first person I wanted to tell about my day, my thoughts, and even my fears, and somehow I became that person for her too. One evening, as we walked along the river, the city lights reflecting off the water, she turned to me with a soft smile. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked. "All the time," I admitted. "I think about how close I was to taking a different train that night, or how if the subway hadn't broken down, we might have never met." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the water. "It's strange, isn't it? How something so inconvenient, so frustrating in the moment, ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me." I stopped walking, and when she looked at me, there was something in her eyes that made my heart ache, in the best possible way. "Maya," I said, my voice quieter than usual, "I don't believe in accidents anymore. That night wasn't random. It was supposed to happen, just like this." Her hand found mine, fingers lacing together effortlessly, as if they'd always been meant to fit that way. For a moment we stood there, wrapped in the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Looking back, it's almost surreal to think how everything unfolded. One broken subway car had brought us together, forcing us to pause in the middle of our chaotic lives long enough to see what, or rather, who, we were missing. That night, which had seemed like nothing more than a hassle, had become the turning point in both our lives. Maya once told me that she used to doubt if true love existed, or if it was just something people told themselves to feel less alone. I'd felt the same way for years, always wondering if the connection I longed for was just wishful thinking. But now, standing beside her, feeling her warmth and hearing her laugh, I knew the answer. It wasn't about fate or chance alone. It was about what we chose to do with the moments we were given. And that night, two strangers had chosen to take a chance on each other. That choice changed everything. Years later, When people ask how we met, we always laugh before answering. It's a story we'll never get tired of telling, not just because of how unlikely it was, but because it reminds us of how love can find you in the most unexpected places. And for us, it started with a broken train and a shared moment that turned into forever. I still think about that night sometimes. The feeling of the cold air trapped in the subway car, the faint hum of tension mixed with frustration from the other passengers. I remember how every sound seemed louder than usual. The shuffle of feet, the rustle of coats, and the occasional groan of the subway itself. It was a setting meant for discomfort, yet somehow, it became the beginning of something extraordinary. When Maya laughed at my first awkward attempt to lighten the mood, it wasn't just her laughter that I noticed. It was the way it softened her entire expression, like the weight of the day had momentarily lifted. And when she looked at me, really looked at me, there was something in her eyes that felt disarming, as though she saw more in me than I thought was there. I didn't realize it at the time, but those moments, the quick exchanges, the shared humor, the vulnerable honesty, were weaving something much stronger than just a passing connection. There was this pause, a silence between our words where I felt everything all at once. The way her voice softened when she talked about her dreams, the way her smile lingered just a second longer than expected, it all stayed with me. Even now I can still hear her voice from that night, filled with equal parts exhaustion and curiosity. "Do you think this is the universe's way of forcing us to slow down?" she had asked. Her words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed, and all I could do was nod, because deep down, I think we both knew she was right. In those quiet hours, when the world outside seemed so far away, we found something neither of us had been looking for. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was in the small moments, the way she tilted her head when she listened, or the way my voice softened when I spoke to her. It felt like the kind of connection you don't just stumble upon. It felt like something rare. Looking back, I think that's what made it so special. It wasn't just the shared circumstances or the conversation itself. It was the quiet, unspoken understanding that we were both searching for something, even if we didn't know it at the time. And in the stillness of that subway car, as the world carried on without us, we found exactly what we needed in each other. Sometimes, you don't find love. It finds you, in moments where you least expect it, when you're too busy or too tired to even notice. And when it does, it doesn't need to announce itself. It's in the way someone makes you feel safe, understood, and seen, even in the chaos of a broken train. For us, it was as simple and as profound as that. Do you believe in soulmates or fate? Share your own love story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how love found you. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales of love and connection.